I was 2.5. I was in the kitchen. My mother was in there ironing, and everyone knows how 2-year-olds are curious. So I just decided I was going to run across that kitchen and watch that plumber at work and see what he was doing. And just when I got there, he splashed with his plunger the Red Devil Lye over the rim of the kitchen sink. And unbelievably, it struck me in both eyes. And
wow.
So, yeah. And so one eye was destroyed. My right eye was destroyed. And my left eye, once it reopened, I think it took a week or two to even open, it was badly damaged. But they were hoping that a corneal transplant might help it.
Margaret Comin, welcome to the See-Through podcast.
Thank you.
This is your first podcast, right?
Yes.
How does it feel?
It feels very exciting to me.
I'm excited to talk to you. You got such an amazing story.
Well, I'm very excited, a little bit nervous, but you mentioned it's going to be simple once we get going, so it sounds great.
It will, trust me. For those listening, I want to do a quick little introduction of Margaret to kind of let you know why she's here and why I'm so excited to talk to her. Margaret is 71 years old, and she has been living with blindness since she was 2.5. So basically 69 years of living with blindness. And she also has a book out called In the Freedom of Space, a memoir on conquering blindness. And it's available now on Amazon. And in that book, it's a memoir of her life where she basically shares very detailed stories about her childhood and upbringing in life, adapting and living with blindness. And the last thing I'll add before I pass the torch to you, Margaret, is your blindness is not from a genetic condition.
Right.
Like most of my guests, your blindness was from an accident,
Right.
Which is very rare and unique. I'll let you give the details of all that. But before we get started, going into your story, I want you to introduce yourself to everyone.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Margaret Comin, and I'm real excited about my book that I've published in Amazon. And as Lance mentioned, in The Freedom of Space, a memoir on conquering blindness, at the very front of the book, I have included a verse from Psalm 118 in the Bible. I called to the Lord from my narrow prison. He answered me in the freedom of space. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and that's relevant to the title of the book and also themes of the book, right?
Yes.
So how about you start, Margaret? Let's start with your childhood. Would you mind sharing the story about how you became blind?
Yes. It was a very odd situation, I think. When I was 2.5 years old, we lived in Houston, Texas, and one day the kitchen sink was stopped up, and so either my mom or dad called for a plumber to come to the home. And so the plumber came in and brought something called Red Devil Lye, which is a very, very caustic way of unstopping a kitchen sink. But anyway, so he brought in his can of Red Devil Lye, which I found out has a red devil on the can, actually. It's just so powerful. But anyway, so I was 2.5. I was in the kitchen. My mother was in there ironing. And everyone knows how 2-year-olds are curious. So I just decided I was going to run across that kitchen and watch that plumber at work and see what he was doing. And just when I got there, he splashed with his plunger the Red Devil Lye over the rim of the kitchen sink. And unbelievably, it struck me in both eyes. And
wow.
So, yeah. And so one eye was destroyed. My right eye was destroyed. And my left eye, once it reopened, I think it took a week or two to even open, it was badly damaged. But they were hoping that a corneal transplant might help it.
Did it burn?
Oh, yeah. It's chemical burns. Yes, they're chemical burns. Yeah. And that right eye, going from just a nice blue eye, just went to like a white eye. It was just white. The chemical burns, yeah.
Did you or your mom or the plumber, did they quite know the extent of the damage that was done, or was everyone thinking, oh, you can just kind of wash it out and then you'll be back to regular business in a week or so, or was it a very serious thing at the moment?
It was considered very serious, at the time. And so my parents pretty quickly took me to Columbia in New York, so that a top corneal surgeon could try doing some corneal transplants on the one eye that still had, a little bit of life to it. And that's where Dr. Ramon Castro Viejo, to this day, he's a renowned corneal specialist, even though he's dead and gone. I mean, his reputation is unmatched. And so in 1955, when this all happened to me, he did a couple of corneal transplants on that left eye. But see, they didn't have any steroids or anything like that. And so the corneal transplant would last like 10 days, and I could see again for 10 days, and then I go blind again. So I think it was a very traumatic situation,
Yeah. And you were so young. You were, like you said, you were 2.5 years old when this happened.
Right. Mm-hmm.
At what age did it start to sink in, and you fully kind of grasp the extent of living with blindness?
I would say around 4 or 5. Yeah, probably around 4 or 5. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Certainly by the time I went to kindergarten, it was very clear to me that I was different,
Yeah. And one thing when researching, your story before the interview, you did not go to a school for the blind.
No.
You were enrolled in public school, and your mom had a very specific way or idea of how to raise you with blindness. Can you kind of talk about that next chapter? What happened after, the incident when you were 2.5? What was the next steps in that?
There was a lot going on there because, my father definitely sued the plumbing company, but see, in those days, you got very little money in lawsuits like that. So today, you'd get a lot of money, but at that time. So with the stress of it all, my parents got divorced. My mother moved back to Jacksonville, Florida, where her parents lived. My brother, 2 years older, Billy, and so mother, took us back there. And then she herself went into a really deep depression, I think, over the divorce and my blinding. It's an awful lot to deal with. And of course, she felt responsible, for the blinding. And as I got older, I blamed her. But anyway, so she was hospitalized for a while for depression. But then,
wow.
And we lived with our grandparents. And then, yes, but my mother got out of the hospital, and her idea was that I should go to public school. Now, in Florida at the time, St. Augustine School for the Deaf and Blind, my grandparents thought I should go there, but my mother said, oh no, you will have to live in the sighted world, so you might as well live here now. And also, she wanted me to live at home with her and my brother. By that point, she had her own place. And
okay.
Yeah, and so anyway, I started out in kindergarten, and it was very difficult because the teacher would pass out these papers like, this is an outline of a house. Color in your house and be careful not to go outside the lines. Well, at this point, all I could see was light, dark, and the color red, okay? And so I got a red crayon, but I'm coloring all over the paper, and the kids near me are saying, you're not coloring in the lines. You're blind. What's wrong with you? You can't see. Your eyes look terrible. It was very traumatic. And the teacher didn't do too much about it. So I would say kindergarten was really hard. And so then when I got to first grade, again, we're in public school, there was one other blind child in the county, Duval County, Florida, that was enrolled in public school, and he was a year ahead of me. So I was in first, he was in second. So at that point, from the Library for the Blind in St. Augustine, they sent up a Braille teacher to Jacksonville to teach Paul and me, Braille, how to read and write in Braille. That was one accommodation that we did get way back then in 1959. So that was great.
That is great.
Mm-hmm. But of course, like the IDEA didn't come out till 1973. There just was hardly anything.
What is that?
I'm sorry, the IDEA, the Individualized Education Act, where people are helped with accommodations. That wasn't passed until 1973, where kids then got a lot of accommodations in public school. And
so before then, the accommodations were not required,
right?
But that right. made them required.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
IDEA. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, so we learned to read and write in Braille. But then, like in the second grade, I had to learn how to type on a regular Smith Corona typewriter, so I could type answers to English tests and spelling tests and all that in the regular classroom. And it really bothered me that I'd be typing and making all this clacking noise and everyone else is so quiet with their pencil. So, it's just all these things that make a child feel so different,
Yeah.
And then the kids had a game called Who's the Prettiest? And so one girl would be kind of lassoed by two others. And then the one girl would say, well, who's the prettiest? And of course, I was never chosen as the prettiest because I had all this eye damage because I had, I had both disability and disfigurement.
Yeah, that's another point. Yeah, that's a great point to bring up because, the soap caused, physical damage to your eyes. So like you just described it, you said it as you describe it as a disfigurement.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as a kid, you don't want to stand out. You don't want to be different. You don't want to get made fun of, and you kind of do your best to kind of not.
Right.
And that's why your situation sounds very difficult because you're kind of put in a position where as much as you could try to not stand out, the sound of your typewriter would make noises. You couldn't color in the lines. And then these childhood games that your classmates were playing, like who is the prettiest,
Yeah, I was never chosen as the prettiest because I had disfigurement,
Were you ever directly bullied?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, kids would come up to me and say, your eyes look terrible. That seems kind of bullying to me.
Yes,
but
I
think it was. To me, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, kids are very honest. Sometimes to a fault.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any resentment towards those comments that are made towards you, or are you pretty accepting of them now? And
oh yeah, I've really moved on now. At the time, I think it was hurtful, and it was just difficult because our mother was divorced, and there were hardly any other parents that were divorced in that day. Early 60s and so forth.
So that was really rare for the time.
Oh yes, and so people would say that to me and my brother. Of course, my brother could see. But, both of us would be made fun of, well, where's your father? Why do you just live with your mother? Well, we live with our father and mother. It was almost scandalous to be divorced in that time,
Wow.
Yeah.
And your parents' divorce was from the stress of the incident?
Well, I'm not really sure because, to tell you the truth, my mother was my dad's first wife, and he had 4 wives. So okay. I'm not really sure.
So maybe he just liked to, have different women in his life, maybe.
But I think, yeah.
Okay. And did your mom ever remarry?
Oh, get this. My mother divorced my dad when she was 32, and she remarried when she was 77.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, my mom's dad, he remarried later in his life too, around 80 years old. So I have that in common with you. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So growing up, all right, so you moved to Florida from Texas.
Right.
You're in elementary school.
Right.
It's not a specific school for blind students.
No.
There's no required accommodations.
Right.
You're kind of on an island. You're kind of on your own. You're kind of at a young age, kind of you against the world a little bit. It sounds like you have the backup from your mom. Was your mom like a comforting figure, or was she kind of intimidating and scary, or how was your relationship with your brother in your childhood, and where did you feel safety, or what was it a constant battle?
Well, I think my mother really loved my brother and me, and the thing about it was she didn't really want to accept my blindness, I don't think. She never wanted to talk about it, and it was real interesting regarding my brother, because we had these games we would play, kids. And so my brother and I had this game we played called Get Across. And he had a base, like a door on one side of the living room. And I had a bookcase on the other side. And then on your mark, get, set, go. And I would try to reach his door and he'd try to reach my bookcase. But in the meantime, he would tackle me as we were crawling across the living room. He would tackle me. He would sit on top of me. He would pin my arms to the ground. And then I would yell for my mother, get Billy off of me. And her line was, settle it yourselves. And I find that so fascinating to this day, that a mother would say to the older sighted brother and the younger blind sister, well, settle it yourselves. Y'all work it out. And so I did. I would say, okay, Billy, I'll give you my Mickey Mantle baseball card and my pink bubble gum if you'll let me go. And then he would let me go. And to this day, he says, well, it was good we did all that because it taught you how to negotiate.
It's one way to look at it.
Yeah. So I thought my mother was, she just sort of let me do whatever. And like when I was 10 years old, she bought me a bicycle built for two, a tandem. And and the idea was I was supposed to ride on the back, and my brother or a friend would ride on the front. But I insisted that one girlfriend, she said, well, look, I'll let you ride on the front. I'll ride on the back. So I'm steering this bike down avenues in Jacksonville, Florida. And my girlfriend is saying, well, go to the left. Here comes a truck. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous. But, and I'm sure people told my mom that they saw me doing all that. But she never corrected me on it. She thought it was just best to give me, that's the freedom part, give me a ton of freedom, I guess.
It sounds like you're thankful for that.
Yeah, oh, I am. I think it's cool. Yeah, I think it's cool.
Yeah. Have you ever kind of imagined a world where your mom wasn't quite so, gracious with giving you the freedom to do these things, and how that might have changed you in your life?
Well, one thing that has kind of bothered me is, I didn't go to a school for the blind. And one thing there, other people I know who did go to schools for the blind, they have lifelong blind friends. They start in first grade, they ended at 12. And see, I didn't have that at all. I have very few blind friends because I didn't grow up with blind people, So I'm not sure, my mother made a decision, and that was what she did. And I think there were, pros to it and maybe cons, but all in all, I'm glad she raised me that way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your childhood is such a unique story for this podcast.
Yeah.
Because you were living in a time where there wasn't all this accessible technology.
Right.
You were using Braille typewriters in class. It wasn't even required to be accommodated.
Right.
There was no such thing as social media, no Instagram communities, no podcast to listen to other people's who are living with blindness or disabilities, their stories, to kind of feel, that you're not alone. And you've kind of lived a life where you've seen kind of things come to fruition where, accessible tech like screen readers and smartphones.
Great.
You've seen all the tech change.
Yes.
Has it been, I think I know the answer, but has it been difficult to adapt to the changes technology-wise? Or do you think that it's easier? Like if you were a 2.5-year-old today and were accidentally blinded, would your life be easier today than it was in 1955? Yes,
absolutely. And, I'm not that great with technology. I love my screen reader, JAWS. And, I handle all my emails fine. And I can handle, Word docs and everything. But, other people are doing well with web, web pages and all this. And I'm just, like I said, my technology, my big thing is email and JAWS. So I think it's a result of just, growing up without this and then not having that easy of a time adjusting. So yeah, I think a 2.5-year-old today blinded would do a lot better with technology. That'd be my opinion.
Yeah. Do you think how people treat each other are different today? Do you think kids would be more, open-minded to having, a blind child in their class? Would they say the same kind of mean comments today? Do you think kids will be kids, or do you think the times have changed in that regard?
I think kids are kids. I don't think there'd be, as you said too, Lance, kids are very honest. And, if they think someone looks weird, they are probably going to mention it,
Yeah, kids have no filter.
Right. That's my opinion. Yeah, my opinion.
Yeah, kids have no filter. And I'm sure in some ways their honesty maybe helped you kind of understand how, in a strange way, their honesty might have helped you learn more about yourself and accept your blindness earlier, because you couldn't like be in denial about it.
Right.
So them being honest kind of made it real and truthful in a way.
Yeah. And then one eye, since it was destroyed, I had to get a prosthesis, for that eye. And the prosthesis never seemed to fit, never seemed to match. That was another nightmare, the prosthetic eye. So
yeah, the prosthetic eye. Do you have one today?
No, I decided just to wear sunglasses today, but for many years, I did. But I'm telling you, Lance, somehow it never really worked perfectly. The prosthetic eye, that eye would open wider than the other eye, or there would always be, or the color didn't match. There was always an issue. So, but.
And you had that as a child, right?
Yes. I'm my first prosthetic eye in the 2nd grade.
How did your classmates react to that?
Well, they commented on that as well. They said, oh, well, now you have a different eye, but it still doesn't look right. I mean, yeah. I'm sure that, kids are kids. It doesn't bother me today. I'm just telling you the story, but I'm over all that by now,
Well, I believe you, and I'm glad you're over it.
Yeah.
And you rightfully so. You've accomplished so much in your life, which we're going to cover.
Yeah.
As we move forward in this interview. But I want to go back a little bit, because you were talking about the pretty game. I have nieces, and they're all one is around 4 years old, and one is around 10 years old, and I know they're kind of like hyper obsessed with Disney princesses and wearing dresses, and how much in terms of your blindness and the disfigurement, how did that affect you mentally, in terms of how do you perceived your level of attractiveness? And you can start with as a child, and also through like adulthood.
Well, as a child, I was pretty crushed about it. And see, I think we're a little bit better today with girls and women. They have more interest than when I was a child. The main thing for a girl was to look pretty, today. And as you say, the princess dresses and so forth. But today, at least girls, play soccer, they play baseball, and back in my day, we only played dolls, and so I think things have improved. But I think I was lifelong damaged by all those comments. And even when, for some strange reason, I didn't start wearing sunglasses till I was like 23. And I'm not sure why, because in high school, I had a really bad prosthetic eye. And I knew that the other kids didn't say anything. We're in high school. But, no one asked me on a date. And, so clearly they didn't like it, or they didn't find me pretty. But anyway, so then what really helped me out was when I met my husband, and we've been married for 47 years, so that's a great deal of our life. And he's always said, I'm very pretty.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. He's always said I'm very pretty, and he thinks I look great, and so that has softened the situation somewhat. You see.
Yeah. And how did you and your husband meet?
Oh, well, we both went to Florida State, and I had a friend back in the day. Of course, this is now like 1973, 4, along in there. I had a friend who was a reader, and that's another thing, Lance. When I was in college, we had readers, and sometimes we had computer tapes and stuff, but we didn't have any of the technology, for books and stuff easy today. For textbooks and stuff, a lot of times I had to pay, or the state paid a reader for me. And so this reader I had, Lloyd, he made the comment to me. He said, well, you have terrible taste in men, Peggy. Well, he called me Peggy. He said, you have terrible taste in men. He had met a few of my boyfriends. And he said, but look, I've met this really nice guy, Bill, and he lives in our apartment complex, and I'm going to have y'all over for a Coke. And so he did, and that's when love was born. Love was born, yeah.
Wow.
So that was real good.
It sounds like you did have bad taste in men.
Well, I think I did, yeah. But again, Lance, see, then here's something significant. Guys would say something to me like, well, you would be pretty, but, your eye situation looks as bad as really severe acne. How would you feel if a college-age young man said that to you? It's terrible, So,
that's horrible.
Yeah. So some of those comments even, bled over into college age. But then, like I said, once I started dating Bill and everything, and we got married in 1977. But anyway, Bill was always saying he thought I was pretty. So that helped a lot,
Yeah. Sounds like you picked the right guy.
Yeah.
And it's obvious because you've been married for 47 years, you
right.
say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a long time.
It is. It certainly is.
I'm married, and before, when I was younger and I was told that I had retinitis pigmentosa, I had this really strong fear that no one would want to date me because I had this eye condition. Did you ever have thoughts like that?
Oh, yeah. And those guys in college didn't make it any better,
Yeah.
And, I just, I told you about the severe acne one comment, and then another guy said, well, my friend thinks you're pretty, but he says, how could I stand to date someone that looks like you? I mean, these are just awful, and, but anyway, so yeah, I share your concerns there. Absolutely.
And for anyone listening, I guess I would just say, if you have thoughts like that, don't, because there's somebody for everyone.
Right.
And you just have to find the right person.
Right.
So yeah, so it sounds like, childhood, elementary school, middle school, high school. It sounds like elementary school was the hardest adjustment period because you had to dive into the deep end, basically, to be around all these children in your class and basically come face to face with how they perceive you, whether they're right or wrong. They told you how they felt, and you had to kind of navigate that socially, try to make friends. It's a very difficult time. Do you think elementary school, your experiences with elementary school helped you socially kind of as you aged? Were you able to kind of work the system socially a little more, make more friends as you aged, or did it get harder?
Well, that's kind of a tough question. I had a couple of very close girlfriends in elementary school. I mentioned the one that would let me ride on the front of my tandem bicycle.
Yeah, great story.
And she came, my mother, if I wanted somebody to spend the night on Friday night, a girlfriend, she would always let me do that. So I had several friends that came, just one at a time and spent the night. And we stayed up all night talking. And so there were some friends in elementary school that were helpful. the other blind child I mentioned, he was a year ahead of me. Like he, I don't know exactly what his role was in the schoolboy patrol because he couldn't really do that, but they had him in as an honorary member. So he invited me as his date to the schoolboy patrol dance, and I was in the fifth grade. I was in fifth grade, and he was in sixth grade. So that was nice, you know. What the problem with high school was, I think I mentioned, I had a very protruding eye with a prosthetic over it, so it looked really bad. And that's one thing I never understood about my mother, is why she wouldn't have, you know, taken me to a doctor and say, you know, we got to have this eye enucleated so that we can have a better prosthesis. But my mother just sort of did her own thing.
Yeah.
I think I kind of explained that.
Your mom is passed now.
Yes.
Did you ever get a chance to ask her these questions? Because, you know, in your book, you kind of, you know, I've read some excerpts from your book, and you mentioned, like, a lot of the times you kind of state, like, I don't know what my mom was thinking. I'm surprised my mom let me do that. I'm surprised my mom didn't do this. Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to talk to her about these things?
Well, not too much. And I can reveal that in the title, I called to the Lord from my narrow prison. The narrow prison for me was that my mother wouldn't talk to me about the blinding incident, because that was such a major incident in my life. And like once every 40 years, I'm serious, I'd say, Mom, can you tell me about what all happened that day? And she would, but she was very, very close. I'm sure it was very painful to her that her child was blinded, you know, at 2.5. I mean, it's a horrible situation. But that was the narrow prison, that she would never talk to me about that. And she was, and then my mother, she got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I mentioned all her depression when she got divorced and everything. And so, you know, she was dealing with that. And, I think my mother was really a pretty interesting person. She was a great pianist. She, you know, played her piano all the time. She taught school. She came from a wealthy family, and that was one thing that I kind of tried to work through about. She didn't watch me very well in that day in the kitchen, but my mother had been a debutante, and she had been raised by servants and all this. And so in a way you could kind of see that a person like that wouldn't be very practical. You know what I mean? So these are just some thoughts I have. Yeah.
And for those who don't know what a debutante is, can you explain that?
Well, a debutante is a high society situation. They do still have them. Usually debutantes come from wealthy families. They're girls that are age 19, and they make a debut, and they go to tons of parties, and they have wonderful dates, and they have to give a couple of parties of their own. It's an expensive situation. But you know, for my mom, and like I said, you know, she was raised by servants, and debutantes are just pretty much stuck on themselves. They're just out there looking beautiful, and so, yeah.
I saw a picture of your mom on the blog.
She was pretty.
She was very pretty.
Yeah.
So we just talked about your mom. How about we talk about your dad? You know, did you ever have a relationship with him, or was it he left and then that was it?
Well, actually, my mother divorced him, which, you know, was, as I said, divorce was scandalous, and for a woman to do it was unbelievable, you know. And but of course you had to have a reason back then, and she had infidelity because he had, you know, affairs and stuff. But anyway, my dad was a very bright guy. He went to Harvard, and
wow.
He was a geologist, and that's why we were living in Texas, you know, Texas oil. But my brother and I are not really sure what was wrong with him. We think he drank a lot, because he would get jobs and lose jobs, get jobs and lose jobs. But he did stay in touch with us. Let's see, he died in 1992. And we were adults by then, of course. Well, yeah, because I would have been 40, and Billy would have been like 42. But in those all those years, he would come see us in Jacksonville. And when he wasn't working, he lived in Worthington, Massachusetts with his foster mother, and he would have us up there. And but he was odd about the blindness thing too. Like we would be in Massachusetts over at an aunt's, you know, house eating dinner. and there'd be a lot of people, and then he would just announce to the crowd, well, Margaret is blind. And it's like, why would your father put you down like that in front of 10 people, So anyway, who knows?
Yeah. It sounds like your mother and father didn't quite know how to accept your blindness.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I think you're right, Lance. Yeah.
And as a child, that had to affect you, where maybe it prevented you from accepting it.
I think you're right.
And then as you age, you kind of grow into your own, and you start to kind of form your own ideas, and you kind of start to realize, kind of like what you mentioned, like, I don't know why my mom would do this or why she did that. Because you're able to kind of form your own story and kind of make sense of things as you age. But as a child, it's very hard to do that because you kind of look to your parents as guidance, And when the guidance is not there, you kind of feel confused and maybe isolated, maybe even less than, would you say?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think I felt very inferior. And see, one thing about my mother too is every night at dinner we had to play games. So it's my mother, my brother, and me, and we weren't allowed really to talk, about much. We just had to play spelling games, and we played one called Famous Initials, where you give like GW and people guess George Washington, you know what I mean? And or Animal, Vegetable, and Mineral, or Hum and Guess 'em. You hum a tune, and the other people try to guess the tune. And so that was another way in which my mother kind of blocked us in a way. We just weren't allowed to talk at dinner. We just played games. And then my grandmother was a significant figure, my mother's mother, and she lived nearby. My grandfather died when I was in second grade, and we had just moved to Jacksonville. But my grandmother was extremely critical of my mother because my mother didn't, follow through and marry some wealthy person and, go through what the debutantes are supposed to do, get married and live on the St. Johns River. And, my mother was a school teacher, so my grandmother criticized her all the time. So there were a lot of dynamics going on,
Yeah, sounds like it. No offense, but it sounds like conversations from past generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure those conversations still happen, but I'm from North Carolina, and my family's all from North Carolina. So, hearing having relationships with my grandparents, I kind of would hear them tell similar stories and hear their perspectives, and it always kind of was from like a critical kind of point of view of how things should be and how people should be, how your hair should look, etc. That type of thing.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
But I was going to ask you next about you have an older brother.
Yeah.
Did he talk to you about it?
Oh, about the blinding? You
Yes.
mean that I was blind? Well, yeah, he would, but our relationship was, it was just such a funny relationship because, he would just kid me most of the time. And like I described that game where, he'd be sitting on me and everything. And he says that it taught me negotiating skills that I got out of it. But yeah, let's see. But he also had this game we would play that I never understood. So again, I think my mother, my brother were real into games. Okay. And so this one that my brother and I played in the backyard, he named it Imaginary Man. And so
Okay.
I would, the pecan tree was home base. So he would put the kickball there and I was supposed to kick it and I couldn't kick it very far. I mean, I was blind. And so, but he'd let me get to first base and then I'd go back home and kick again. He'd let me get to first base and there's imaginary man on first base. Now there's imaginary man on second base. And my third kick, he'd just tag me and say, "You're out." And then he'd have me roll him the ball, which he would hit over into a neighbor's yard and he'd have a home run. So, that kind of bothered me as a child that he was definitely setting himself up superior to me,
Yeah.
But he loves me. I mean, we love each other, but it's just interesting, all the games,
Are you still close with your brother?
Oh, yeah. My brother's only 2 years older than I am. And you see, in some way, we may have saved each other because, our mother, had the bipolar thing and all that. and our grandmother was critical. And so here we were, the two kids, and we probably did a lot for each other in a way,
Yeah.
as children. Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah. I'm just trying to get everyone up to speed, and myself included, on your kind of dynamics with your family and how it kind of, who you had as resources around you,
Well, my mother was real nice to us, I would say. She was very nice to us, but she spent a lot of time just, lying in bed and reading books and, but, we loved her. We loved her.
Okay. And you were a mom yourself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, we have two children. They're 40 and 36. And so Meredith is 40 and Doug is 36. And we can't get our kids married. They're both single, but they both have great careers. And I think they're, they each have a significant other. I think they're getting close to marriage. I would like to have some grandchildren, Lance. So, I don't mention it too often, just at Christmas and Easter. I tell them, hey, guys, hey, you two, I would really like some grandchildren.
Yeah, I'm getting to that age now. I'm 34. Well, I'm technically 33, but I'll be 34 in a couple of months. So I just kind of round up to it. But I'm feeling a little bit of that pressure myself.
Yeah.
So you're a mom now. How did your childhood and your relationship with your mother impact you as a mom?
Well, I think I was more involved because, for one thing, if you're blind and you've got little children, you got to be right there with them if you're blind. You know what I mean? Like, my mother could sit in bed and read a book or whatever. And clearly, she gave us a ton of freedom. I mean, even the freedom, it's just interesting when the plumber situation and my mother and me, that she just did nothing to keep the 2-year-old away from danger, but anyway, I was always trying to keep them, away from danger when they were little. And I had a situation when Doug, I put him in it's called a maxi taxi. It's a fancy stroller. And I sure thought I got that kid, his harness and laptop, his lap belt and harness. I thought I had it all in. And I parked it at the top of the driveway and I locked the stroller. And I went in the house and grabbed, his bottle real quick. And when I went back out there, I put my hand in the stroller and he was gone. And it's like no one else was at home. There were no neighbors. Meredith was in kindergarten. Bill was at work. It was just me there with Doug. And it was terrifying because if he crawled down the driveway, he'd go right into the street. Yeah. And so I just kind of stood there frozen. And then from 10 feet away or something, I heard him laughing, and he was just crawling toward the front door from the den door. So he was fine. But situations like that are terrifying to a blind parent.
Yeah, that's a concern of mine. As I think about being a potential parent, as my vision digresses, if my child gets out of my blind spot, or if I'm pushing a stroller outside, crossing the street, am I going to not see a car? Am I going to mess up, basically make a mistake due to my vision? It really concerns me, and can give me quite a bit of anxiety if I think too much and deeply about it. Right. Yeah, no,
I completely agree. But one thing about that stroller story, it made me reflect about my mother, that if my child had crawled down into the street, which he could have done, and been hit by a car, I would have certainly felt responsible, So that made me kind of forgive my mother somewhat,
Yeah, mistakes happen, don't they?
Right.
Do you think your mom ever forgave herself?
I think she did. I think that she had so much going on with her, with her bipolar, and then her mother, and then my accident, and then her divorce. I mean, she really had some hard times,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope she did. Anyway.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Did the plumber feel bad?
I guess, yeah. I mean, if you blinded a child, but I'm sure whatever money my parents got out of the plumbing company, I would imagine he lost his job and everything. But as I mentioned, in that day, you didn't get much money in lawsuits like that. Today you'd get $1 million, but
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure he felt terrible, but I never had I don't know his name. I have never had any contact with him,
Okay. And being a blind mother was, outside of, having these few instances where, like you just described the story of, your son crawling towards the front door.
Right.
Was it easier than you expected, harder than you expected? What advice would you give to other, people living with blindness who want to be parents or new parents? I
think it was easier than I expected. And I think it's important to kind of keep a sense of humor about it. Because I know my daughter, Meredith, when she was 3, I would give her a little box every day of those Sun-Maid raisins. And I'd say, now, Meredith, you eat this little box of raisins and then bring me your empty box. And so every day, she'd bring back this empty box. And then one day she had this rocking horse and it had a stand with, poles, like 4 poles that were holding up the rocking horse and formed the stand. And I took the top off of one of the poles. It was filled with raisins. Just so we still laugh about it. But it's like, hey, Meredith, you already knew at 3 that you could take advantage of your blind mother.
That's funny.
But it was just kind of fun. So we've tried to have some laughs along the way and try not to take things, too seriously,
Definitely.
Yeah.
And in terms of your husband, was it easy for him to kind of adapt to, being married to someone who was blind? Yeah.
And my husband, all along, like, people would ask him, well, why did you marry a blind person? And he always said, because I fell in love with a blind person. Which, I fell in love with a blind person. It's such a lovely retort,
That's a perfect answer.
Yeah.
He sounds like a great guy.
He is. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've covered, a lot of your childhood. I wanted to kind of move into your career because you're very highly educated.
Yeah.
You have 3 master's degrees.
Yeah, I do.
And like we mentioned, you're an author. How did you decide? Because you have several degrees. Would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about your education background?
Sure. Yeah, well, I got my bachelor's in English at Florida State, when Bill and I met there and married, in Tallahassee. Yeah. And then as my kids, I stayed home quite a few years with my kids. But as they became, middle school and stuff like that, I wanted a career. And so I went to Georgia State. I live in Atlanta. And I got a master's in, the first one was in school counseling. Okay. I got a master's in school counseling. And so I did always been a high achiever, Lance. So I did well in my grades and everything. And so after I went part-time, I think it took me about 3 years. And so then I would be called to interviews in my county, but nobody would hire me. And, it's just, the prejudice, against blind people, and no one would hire me. And so then I talked to the people at rehab and, rehabilitation, and they said, well, get a master's in rehab, we'll hire you. So I went back to Georgia State. Fortunately, some of the classes just floated over to the rehab masters, which I got. And the minute I got that, I was hired by the Georgia Vocational Rehab Agency here in Atlanta. And I worked there for 17 years. Wow. And then I just decided that, I'd always done some writing. And so I thought, well, I'll get a master's degree at Kennesaw State, which is a university in the Atlanta area. I want to get one in professional writing and continue on with my book. I had done a little bit on my book. And so that's how it all happened.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have a minor in creative writing.
Oh, good.
And my major is in film studies.
Yeah. Those sound interesting.
My sister has two master's degrees, and they're all related in they're actually related to psychology and counseling for substance abuse, things like that.
Yeah. Well, y'all are doing well.
And my dad was a school psychologist.
Yeah. Well, psychology is an interesting field, and the rehab counseling is, has some connection to psychology, I would say.
Definitely.
Counseling. Yeah.
That's why I wanted to share that, because it's kind of a connection. Okay, so you have these achievements. It's kind of a known fact that in the blindness community, there's a high unemployment rate. I think it's really inspirational to hear your success and your abilities to go to college and get these careers. When factoring in what career choices you wanted to kind of pursue, how much did blindness affect your options and choices?
Well, as I mentioned, when I got the school counseling degree, I think it was pretty clear that no one would hire me in the school system, But then when the Georgia Vocational Rehab Agency, I spoke with them and they said, well, get a master's in rehab counseling, we'll hire you. So I was affected by their telling me they would hire me.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean, Lance? And they said, yeah, we'll hire you. So I said, okay, great. I'll go get another master's in rehab counseling. And then the Kennesaw State was just my interest in writing. And so then I wanted to, write a thesis and all that. So then, see, the thesis ended up being the basis of my book. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask this because I'm curious myself. So you're writing in Braille, right? Correct?
Yeah, I write things in Braille, but then I type them up on my regular computer with JAWS.
Okay.
I type it up in print. But, that's interesting because my first association with reading was Braille. I have always loved to write things in Braille, and that's meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really unique. I don't know many people who know how to read Braille.
Well, Braille is very complicated because, it's really like a code, and you got your 26 letters of the alphabet, but then there's probably like 300 shorthand symbols in Braille. A lot of Braille is shorthand. So you take like a letter like W. Okay, so W standing alone with space on either side is the word will. But with one dot in front of it, next to it, it's the word work. With two dots before it and W, it's the word word, W-R-D. And with three dots before it, it's the word world. So that's what you get out of W in Braille.
Sounds complex.
It's very complicated. But
do you prefer Braille?
Oh, yeah.
To screen reading?
Well, I've gotten pretty, because a lot of books don't really come in Braille, and Braille is expensive if you want to buy Braille books. I think now I might be kind of equal, but I'd say for many years I preferred Braille. But I'm so used now to JAWS, JAWS now,
I was curious because I was wondering if you worked with editors, were they able to read your Braille? Did you have to work with other blind editors? Or,
No, like in my thesis and everything, I had to type it all in print. And the professors at Kennesaw State gave me their, they emailed me their the points to ponder or things to improve upon on my writing. They would just email me comments and stuff. So they did not know Braille. No.
That's very unique. Yeah. And so, you had this career as a rehab counselor. And what did that entail?
Well, the Georgia Vocational Rehab Agency, you see, our focus was to get people with disabilities back into the workforce. You see, because we're Georgia vocational, so we're in the vocational part of it, of rehab counseling. So I had people, with all kinds of disabilities. I mean, blind people, of course, and sometimes people with psychiatric illnesses, autism, mental retardation, a number of different areas that I would work with. And what we tried to do was find out through testing what what an individual client could do, or if they were, if they were smart and could do more than a basic job or whatever. We tried to get a handle on that. And then we would send people for education. We would send people to college. We would send people to, to training. We did a lot to get people into the workforce. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a really helpful job that makes a difference.
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah, I think it did. I think it does. It does.
Are you proud of yourself and how you've had a career with blindness and your accomplishments, with your master's degrees?
Yeah.
Or did you always kind of assume, you describe yourself as smart, or did you always kind of assume that you would do well and succeed academically?
Well, I think what happened with that who's the prettiest thing, I wasn't going to be the prettiest girl in the class, even starting in elementary school, but I had to do something. So I decided I was going to be smart. So, I don't know if I hadn't had that accident, Lance, what I would have done, but it was like I became an overachiever because I wanted recognition for something,
Yeah. And you got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really unique. And I think that's very inspirational for people listening to kind of understand, like, hey, I can pursue a career. I'm going to hit obstacles like you hit where people would not hire you. But if you're persistent enough, you can find a way.
Yeah. That's right.
But it does take persistence, and it's not going to be easy is what it sounds like to me.
Right. I agree.
One thing I wanted to add that's kind of separate from your education that I find really fascinating was that you've had, you had the accident with your eyes when you were 2.5.
Right.
And then you've had several like corneal transplant surgeries.
Yeah.
And you had some when you were a child and then some in your adulthood.
Right.
And basically you had these corneal transplants and they allowed you to see some things.
Yeah.
But they were not permanent.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I think I mentioned, when I was a child, Dr. Castroviejo there in Colombia, he did a couple of corneal transplants, but they didn't have steroids or anything. So, they would reject in like 10 days. And I think it must have been awful for me to see again and then not see again. I mean, it just seems so confusing. But then when I was 32, I had a corneal transplant at Emory that worked briefly. But the one, interestingly, that worked the best was at age 55 at Emory, 2008.
Okay.
And that corneal transplant was really interesting because for so long I had just seen light, dark, and the color red. And so my husband took me to the paint store and taught me all the different colors. And my kids, who were already adults, they would go buy, picture books and say, hey, Mom, this is a picture of a kite. This is a picture of a giraffe, And one thing I realized, Lance, is that you can't transpose, like you can feel a kite. But when I was then when I saw a picture of a kite, I had to learn what the picture was. Like you don't have a picture in your mind of a kite. You can feel the kite, but then seeing the kite, oh, that's what a kite looks like. See what I mean?
Yeah. So how much vision did they restore?
Oh, I think about 2,400 in that eye. But I mean, I would just be learning what salt looked like and what, pepper looked like. And we went to the zoo and I mentioned, looking at all the animals and like the elephant, I could not believe the size of an elephant. I'm like, that elephant is just huge.
Well, this seems like almost like magical. It almost seems mythical. It's kind of like something you daydream about. You're like, you were blind and what would it be like to see some of these things? It's kind of like a magical moment. Did it feel magical or did it feel scary?
Oh, no. It felt very magical. I could not see, faces clearly. But all these other things, I mean, I would go into a parking lot and just jump over the white lines because I could see the white lines for the identifying the parking spaces. I would just be jumping. I mean, I'm like, 55 years old. I'm jumping over white lines. I'd have my husband. Oh yeah. And so then I learned how to read Big print, not big print like you would think of, but like 1 inch tall print.
Yeah.
My husband took me to the grocery store, and I would have him drop me off in the cereal aisle, and then I would, was so excited. Raisin Bran, I could read these, and I had learned the letters of the alphabet print. And so, okay, this is Raisin Bran. I can spell it out. This is Cheerios. I can spell it out. It was very exciting.
Yeah, that is very exciting.
Yeah.
Were you able to have enough vision to see like pictures and like kind of see your husband's face, your children's face?
No, I couldn't ever see faces. But there were, and I already knew, my husband and my kids by personality and stuff. So I really didn't feel too bad about that. One thing that was great though was getting around, mobility, because you know how that goes, Lance. If you can, even if you have your cane, if you can see things coming up that are in your path, it's very helpful.
Yeah. So and that was at the age of 55. How long did that last?
A couple of years, and then I went totally blind. Now I have no vision at all. So
what happened to cause that?
The cornea rejected.
So it took 2 years to reject it, huh?
Yeah, well, maybe 2.5. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it didn't reject right away. Well, see, by then they had really good steroid drops and stuff like that. So I was putting in drops constantly.
So now you have no vision?
None at all. Mm-mm.
So when you had the accident as a child, how much vision did you have as a child?
Light, dark, and the color red.
So it was just kind of lights and shadows a little bit.
Right. Mm-hmm. Like when I went to kindergarten and elementary school and all that, I had light, dark, and the color red. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then that corneal transplant kind of gave you a little bit more sharpness, and you were able to kind of see more detail in certain things, but not quite enough detail to see faces and things like that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And then now, after the corneal transplant at 55 rejected, now is it just darkness?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How was that adjustment?
Well, not that bad, because so much of my life I had only seen light, dark, and color red. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it didn't seem, I just, I adjusted pretty well.
I find that interesting, because I feel like that wouldn't be the case for a lot of people. I think some people would really want to cling on to that. Why do you think it is that you were able to kind of accept it going away?
To me, just because, of the length of time that I couldn't see much, No, it didn't bother me that much. No.
I think that's great to hear.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah.
Because I would imagine, some people would hear that story and be like, oh, she would be devastated. She had some vision, and thought the corneal transplant was going to keep, and then it didn't. You know?
Oh, well, I must say, at first I was very upset, but I mean, I adjusted to it fairly quickly. But you're right. At first, I was very upset about it, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't stay that way, is how I should have explained it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. You had already kind of built these skills in to kind of accept things.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't unfamiliar to you anymore.
Right.
I see.
Yeah.
So now let's get into your book. You mentioned you got your master's degree in writing.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
And then your thesis kind of turned into your book.
Right. Right.
Your book is a memoir on your life, and it's basically kind of what we discussed, but way more detailed. A lot of storytelling involved.
Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
What made you want to, outside of the obvious, that you have a very interesting life?
Yeah.
What made you want to write about yourself and go kind of that route versus writing maybe a fictional story or something different?
Well, I guess what you said. I thought I had an interesting story, and I was hoping that it could be inspirational to other people that are maybe having maybe have both blindness and disfigurement, or one or the other. I was hoping it could be inspirational to some people, and I was hoping it could be educational to some sighted people about what a tremendous mountain there is to climb, to get a hold of all this. I thought would be kind of educational for sighted people. And then the rehab counseling students and the rehab counseling professors at Georgia State, the professor said I can come there in the fall and talk to the rehab counseling students about this is what a person really goes through that ends up in rehab, in rehab counseling, in the world of rehab. I think that would be good for the students to hear from me.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think? Yeah,
I completely agree. I think that's why I brought you on the podcast, because I wanted my audience to hear your story.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And your book's available on Amazon. For those listening or watching, I'll have a link in the episode description that'll take you directly to purchase that book. Do you want to talk about, you want to hype up your book at all? Promote it?
Oh, well, I think it's a good book. I hope that, people will read it and follow, my ideas that I outlined, inspirational and educational and so forth. It's a life story. It took me about 10 years to write it, actually. And I think it's a good book. So I hope people will read it.
And I've had the luxury, I got to read some excerpts from the book, and it's very, very detailed. That's one thing I noticed, where you're recounting these memories you had as a young child, and I started to think to myself, I'm like, I don't think I could remember these specific details. Like you'll recount like the smell, like playing the imaginary man. You kind of remember the smell of the ball. Yeah. You're like, the ball smelled like rubber.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, like, it seems like you have such a great memory.
Oh, thank you.
Do you think it's because you had to focus on different senses? That way certain smells and sounds and memories kind of stand out more?
Yeah, I think I developed a good memory as kind of, a huge help to me. Of course, when I just had light, dark, and the color red, I sure had to memorize where I was in my house, where I was in my grandmother's house. She had a big house. And, where I was on the streets near my house, where I was in the park. And again, see, my mother, it's like we had a park a couple blocks away. And, I'd say, okay, Mom, I'm going to the park. She's like, okay, see you later. Have fun. I mean, she had no concern. So I would go down to the park. So I had to memorize where the bridges were in the park, over the creeks. I think it was kind of a survival thing.
Wow.
Yeah, but
that makes
did.
Total sense.
Yeah, I did develop a strong memory. That's true. Yeah. But then
I just noticed that in the writing, and I was like, this is so detailed.
Oh,
and it's something that happened to you when you were like 5 years old. So it's just, I found it fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
And the book covers from age 2.5 up to 2012, right?
Right. Yes. Age 60. Mm-hmm.
Age 60.
I was 60 in 2012, and my mother was 86. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think, for those listening, and why I find your story so interesting is the, if you're someone who's interested and you want to learn about blindness, it's very unique to hear your story, because it takes you back to a time before, like we talked about, these modern amenities that people have the luxury of having now. And you kind of get insight to, it's not that long ago where this technology didn't exist. It's one generation ago,
right?
Where screen readers didn't exist, and being accommodated for in school wasn't a requirement. It really wasn't that long ago. So
no, it wasn't.
If you're a modern day person, you should be thankful for, the progress that's been made. And thankful for the progress that's been made.
Definitely. I think it's really helped people, really helped people.
And it's only going to keep getting better and better,
right.
And obviously people fighting for, disability rights, and things like that should keep doing that. So it keeps getting better and better and better. There's always room for improvement. But I think that would be really fascinating for people to learn about, what was it like to be blind in the 1960s? It's just very unique. And I think this book gives great insight to that timeline.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I guess we're getting towards the end of wrapping up this conversation. You started kind of our conversation with that Bible verse that's in your book. And you mentioned that's like in the first page.
Well, yes, it's when you open the book, I had the editor, put this Bible verse I think it's on the second page of the book, but it's so significant to the book, I wanted it written there at the front. And should I explain then what it means, or have people be surprised, Lance?
That's up to you. I'll let you decide, because it's your book, it's your message. That's really up to you.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you this, that, I called to the Lord from my narrow prison. I believe I mentioned the narrow prison was my mother's unwillingness to talk about the accident. Because if you're in a really serious accident like that as a child, you want to know everything about it, every detail, and she would only talk about it like once every 40 years. So that was that. And I'll just say, in the freedom of space, I called to the Lord from my narrow prison. He answered me in the freedom of space. I thought my mother answered me with all the things she let me do, ride the tandem bike and go down to the park by myself and go roller skating in the street by myself. I mean, she just gave me so much freedom. And my brother sitting on me and pinning me to the floor, she just never babied me in any way. And so I think in the end, I was kind of able to forgive my mother. Well, one, because something could have happened to my kids, but also because she gave me so much freedom. So it was in the freedom of space that I felt I forgave her. Yeah.
So that Bible verse really felt like it really spoke to you and kind of felt true to your experience.
Yes. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but that verse has meant a lot to me.
That's good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you have such a rich and intricate life? We didn't get to cover every single thing, which more is covered in more detail in your book.
Right.
But is there anything else you wanted to cover?
Well, you'll find some things surprising in the book, and so I want you still to read it. There's some things that I'm not going to tell you about, in the hope that you'll read the book.
Yeah. Everyone check it out. Yeah. How much does it cost? Well,
the paperback's $14.95, and the Kindle's $4.95. Is that right, Lance?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah.
So it's available on Kindle.
Yes. And
then you can also get a paperback.
Right.
And I'll have links to those in the episode description. Show your support for Margaret. She wrote this book, and it's very detailed, and I think her story is well worth your time.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lance. I sure appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and talking to me and sharing all this with me. I found it very entertaining and interesting and educational, which again was the point of your book. So I recommend everyone check it out. Like I said, you're not quite on social media or anything that way, right?
I do have a Facebook page, but I don't use it much. But my daughter has like 2,000 friends on Facebook, and she did publicize my book on her Facebook page. So that was good. Mm-hmm. That was good.
Yeah, I just, some people like to follow people, but in your case, the best way to follow Margaret is to check out her book.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. We covered so much ground in such little time, and there's so much more that we didn't cover.
Yeah.
Like you discussed. And thanks for coming on the See Through podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I wish you the best of luck, and cheers to the next, chapter in your life. Your story's not over.
No, not yet. Thank you.
All right. So take care.
Okay.